Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Hello and welcome. This is Invest Africa and I'm your host, Nozi Pombandra. Thank you for making the time to join us this evening. Now, it's been a little over a decade since University of Michigan professor C.K. Prahalad proposed that servicing the bottom or the base of the economic pyramid could be both profitable and philanthropic. Since then, searching for the pot of gold in the world's emerging markets has become an attractive option. But is there really a fortune to be made, and can it be done in an ethical way as well as an empowering way? Joining me now to discuss this and to take on some of these questions is Tashma Ishmael. She heads up the Inclusive Markets Program at Gibbs. Yorana Sabi, he's the founder of Digital Solutions Group. And in Lagos, we're joined by Raphael Afido. He's the co-founder and CEO of Supermart.NG. Now, for you at home, if you'd like to be a part of this conversation, you can certainly do that. Follow me on Twitter at Nozi Pombandra or at CNBC Africa, and don't forget to use the hashtag InvestAfrica. Let's get right into it. And Tashma, let's start off with you helping us to understand the target market we're actually talking about. Who is the bottom of the pyramid? How big is this particular market? And why is it of interest to Gibbs at this time?
So we talk about the base of the pyramid. We talk about people who earn under $8 a day. There's some interesting Credit Suisse data which has helped us to understand that we have about 3 billion adult people, 69% of the world's population, who control about 3.3% of global wealth. So a large number of people controlling very little global wealth. Mostly they sit in India and Africa. We find Latin America and China have managed to move people out of this bracket and into a slightly higher income earning bracket.
So essentially they are a big consumer market that is available for tapping because they don't really control any of this wealth.
So they're consumers in that they're very underserved. So you find that there's not a lot of financial services or product that's reaching them properly at the moment. Drugs, health, life-saving drugs are an example. However, very difficult to reach this customer. Each customer has a small pocket, a small wallet, and serving this consumer means a lot of innovation to get it right.
They're difficult to reach, they have small pockets, they need you to go the extra mile to actually get the service and the product to them. So why are investors going there? Why is this suddenly such an attractive investment case?
Well, in the industry that I'm in technology and telecoms, this is the next billion people that are going to be connected to the internet. So it's a very important market. I think although they have affordability issues, you can adapt your strategy, your marketing strategy to fit their pocket. So for example, in South Africa, the prepaid market was invented specifically to serve that target market, and you can recharge with R5, which is very affordable. And it's amazing how the spend on basic technologies that are very, very important to their target market, it's a basic need to have access to the internet or have access to a telephone, is there. So it's a very exciting market, tough market, but an important market to focus on.
A tough market, an exciting market. Let's get a sense from Lagos, from Raphael, who's a co-founder and a CEO of an online supermarket group. Raphael, give us a sense of how are you connecting and finding the bottom of the pyramid in Nigeria, and whether Supermart.NG is trying to tap into that space at all?
The way we see it is any conversation about the customer has to start first and foremost with the way the customer lives his life. Okay, so what exactly is the customer buying? How does the customer access technology, if technology is what's going to be used to reach the customer? And that conversation then moves from there. When you think about it, at $8 a day, these people are actually earning close to $300 if you think about it at the end of the month, if you factor in all the other informal sources of income that they have access to. It's a sizable market. The point then becomes, how do you reach these people? What kind of products are they buying, and how do you use a formal structured channel to take the products to them in a more profitable way? Because accessibility is also a problem for them. right? So if you can take it to them, profitable for you in a way that's actually cost effective for them, you have a big market on your hands.
It certainly sounds like the channels are coming through as a very important part of the conversation. Maybe Tashmia, let's talk about what are you advising corporates in terms of how do they get the right channels in place to tap into that market?
So we advise them to use local partnerships. We're strong believers in local networks. Also if you create partners on the ground, local people who help you get your product into what we call the last mile or this capillary network, you also create incomes. And this creates more prosperous societies, and then they can buy your goods. So we're saying have an inclusive strategy that builds and grows the market as you try to serve it.
Let's use a practical example where we've seen that particular network come to life, where local on-the-ground networks have really enabled servicing of that particular market. Can you give us something from the African continent?
I mean, Coca-Cola is a brilliant example. They took, in Tanzania, they took local entrepreneurs, skilled them up, helped them set up mini distribution hubs, and then from those mini distribution hubs, they created their own micro distribution strategies to local businesses in the area. So that is the sort of thing we see. We also see it with banking. If you look at Standard Bank in the townships, they created an access banking model which turned little spaza stores into micro bank branches. And that was also a pretty interesting model. So you could open an account with a lady standing at the corner under a canvas, a t-shirt that says "Ask me how." In 2 to 5 minutes you have an account, and then when you want to start transacting, you go to the local spaza store, and that becomes your branch.
What's coming through for me, Iran, from what Tashmia is saying is it almost seems as if empowering the citizenry is part and parcel of the business model. And you're very focused in the mobile technology space. Maybe you can also add in terms of another example where we've seen mobile technology really enable not only the penetration of the market, but the empowerment of the broader community that market is serving.
Yeah, so to go back to the prepaid airtime example, when we launched the second mobile network operator in Namibia, we empowered every customer to be able to sell our airtime so we can maximize the reach, because Namibia is such a big country. To set up retail stores similar to branches or to reach all the subscribers is just impossible. So anybody that had access to a phone could buy airtime from us and sell that airtime onwards through an electronic voucher distribution system. So technology is making it easier to empower through mobile point of sale, through different aspects of technology. You can maximize your reach and empower the distribution to be done by anybody.
Raphael, could I be bold enough to say that we're moving away from seeing the bottom of the pyramid as a philanthropic space and maybe a space where the consumers can become co-creators of the services and the enterprises that they need and desire?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very sizable market, like we agreed earlier. And so it's just really a case of being able to reach them with economical solutions that really make sense for both the person providing the solution and the customer on the receiving end. And you can think of a lot of examples. For example, leveraging technology with what I do, for example, which is online retail of goods and services. One of the things that can be done is, for example, to put the product that we sell on buses that traverse the streets, where the markets where these people, for example, go trade their local goods, and all they have to do is to just type almost like short codes via text message, and then they have the products delivered to a particular address for them to be able to pick up. This way they're able to access stuff they're not able to access very easily, like medicines and whatnot, right? So it really is a case of understanding that this is a sizable market and being able to find solutions that are cost effective and taking it to them, and if really it makes sense for them because they're not able to access the solutions otherwise, the products and services otherwise, you have a market on your hand.
Raphael, maybe let's stay with you. And I mean, you bring up two very important points. One, looking at retail, and the other, the pharmaceutical space. And it really seems like the international players have come in a bit more fast and more robust than local players when it comes to tapping into this market, in particular around retail and the pharmaceutical space. What is it going to take? What kind of support is necessary to help local players also become formidable in the space?
I think partnerships, like mentioned earlier, will be very important, because what I've seen is there is no cookie cutter approach here. I mean, solutions that have worked in the West will not necessarily work in sub-Saharan Africa, because the sub-Saharan African customer, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, has his own way of living life, right? So you need to be able to tailor the solution to the needs of this customer. So partnerships will be absolutely important. The Western companies come with the technology to be able to develop the products and services cheaper. The local, with a good understanding of how the consumer lives, be able to come up with, like, strategies to be able to reach the consumer. I think that's how we actually get a winning formula.
I'd maybe like to get your added input on that, that interplay between the multinationals that are coming in and maybe using a cookie-cutter approach, and they've got the economies of scale to do that, versus the local players who have a more nuanced understanding of the play on the ground, but maybe not the muscle to play out like the multinationals can.
So the multinationals have to be here. This is the next billion customers, as you talked about. This is the only place they're going to grow their top line. The other markets are saturated. But, they come from a world that is so completely different. Things work. Rules are static. You can count on the environment being the way it is today, next week, and the month after. Here, things are in flux. The ground shifts under you all the time. And Raphael mentioned the idea of partnerships and collaboration, and I think that is the only way that a multinational will survive on this continent, is by getting that agility and flexibility, getting local partners, and very importantly, employing local people. The expat model of importing the guys from Sweden or wherever it might be it really gives them limited understanding of the market. But local employees make all the difference.
Tashmi raises an important point of almost integrating the local people into the value chain. You've been on the ground, Yaron. Is that actually happening? Or are you still flying to China first to get the goods and services to sell them back in Addis or wherever the market may be?
I think certain things make sense to manufacture in China, so they're still manufactured in China. Like most cell phones, I think every single cell phone manufacturer is based in China, but what we're seeing is local assembly. We're seeing that the approach to the Chinese manufacturers is we actually tell them how to make their cell phone that's going to be relevant, and the services that are going to be loaded onto the cell phone that are going to be relevant for their target market. So, for example, we've got lots of different languages on the continent. So, we're seeing more and more Swahili coming up with Google. We're seeing a lot more technology. So you're thinking global, but you're acting local. And the music, because the mobile phone has become a multi-purpose device. So music is very, very important to deliver and distribute through mobile technology, is all local music. So it's a combination of the two. So the hardware may be sourced somewhere else, but the content and the applications and the relevance to the local market has to be there for it to be successful.
Certainly sounds like Africa is playing a more meaningful role in servicing the bottom of the pyramid. On that note, let's take a quick break. But when we come back, we take an even deeper look at the investment opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid on the continent. Welcome back to Invest Africa. Tonight we're talking about the bottom of the pyramid and investing in that space in Africa. Remember that we do value your suggestions and your feedback. You can send us an email, that's to investafrica@abn360.com, or talk to us on Twitter @CNBC Africa or @Nozipombandro, and the hashtag is Invest Africa. With me, I still have my guest, Tashma Ishmael. She heads up Inclusive Markets. That's the program at Gibbs. Yaron Asabi, he's the founder of Digital Solutions Group, and in Lagos we still have Raphael Afedo, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Supermart.NG. Now, during the break, I got a bit of pushback from Tashma. She was listing all the African examples and African players who are really tapping into this particular market. Maybe let's get you to bring in that nuance of the conversation.
Sure. I mean, I can understand with pharmaceutical companies and some fast-moving consumer goods, you have big multinationals who are players. But in financial services and telecoms, if we look at MTN, they've made the biggest inroads. Airtel, in financial services, Standard Bank is big. Equity Bank, I've just come back from Kenya, and Equity Bank is huge there. They're going for like 10 million customers in the next 10 years. And every second store that you look at is an M-Pesa agent or an Airtel agent. And so, we have national players with strong national footprints. They're not just in one country, they're in the whole of East Africa or the whole of West Africa. So I think we mustn't underestimate the power of national competition and the growth of local firms, local African firms taking big market share.
Aaron, I know that you're very excited about Safaricom and the kind of things that they're doing in the eastern part of the continent.
Yeah, so I think the most exciting part of what Safaricom did is they created 25,000 jobs for agents that can offer their airtime and their mobile financial services. And they've created a huge contribution to the GDP. Over 30% of the GDP is actually processed through M-Pesa. So it's incredible. And I think it's the most admired business model when it comes to mobile financial services. And it's kind of spurred the rest of the continent to want to follow suit. If it wasn't for the agent banking and the empowerment of the right people to deal with it, difficult market to access that we spoke about earlier, I think they wouldn't have been as successful as they are. And the proof is in the pudding. In other countries where M-Pesa has launched, where the agent network has not been as strong, it hasn't been as successful.
I want us to come back to that because I think it raises a very important debate around inclusion and exclusion and whether some of these initiatives are really driving inclusion or not. But before we do that, let's quickly go to Lagos. And Raphael, just get insight from you in terms of this ethical expectation when it comes to servicing the bottom of the pyramid. It seems as if investors have to carry on this additional responsibility when they play in that particular space. That's what we're seeing in the textbooks. But what does it actually look like on the ground? Is there a focus on ethical servicing of the market, empowerment of the community, and sustainable investment in that space?
So I think you ask a very, very good question. I think it also is very specific to the particular industry. So in the food industry, for example, I know of initiatives, for example, where you have smallholder farmers being brought together to be able to cultivate their crop, and they're given access to fertilizer, they're given access to the know-how, access to the other ingredients that enable the plants to be able to grow and into a healthy crop. And so this, for example, empowers the locals to be able to make the most out of their land, right? Of course, the money they make then, of course, is then spent on purchasing. The other industries have their own challenges. I'm not very familiar with them. I know, for example, a lot of gains have been made in spaces like the oil and gas sector, but I'm not very familiar with those. But for food and agriculture, I think it's possible to do this in a way that is inclusive for the peasant farmers.
Tashma, would you support that view, and in particular that maybe some of the naysayers that have said servicing this market is really a new form of exploiting the poor on the continent, whether it's Africa or Asia, and really that there is sustainable investment here?
It's difficult to play Big Brother, and you don't want to be patronizing towards a market. People are sharp enough to decide what they need and when they need it. But I still do feel very strongly that there are ways of still being exploitative. I'm going to say something quite controversial. It stems from a conversation I had with someone around financial inclusion. In South Africa, financial inclusion often means indebtedness. So we're dealing with a market. If we look at Human Development Index, education levels are low, literacy, especially financial literacy, is low. Health indicators are awful. And so there has to be a responsibility that when I do business here, I've got to think seriously about the shared value approach, because you can still be exploitative.
The challenge is being put in front of you. So let's take the example that you so glowingly spoke about early on. Let's talk about Safaricom. That has also come under pressure because they're saying, well, it's not necessarily inclusion. There isn't really a robust saving mechanism that is related to M-Pesa. It's really just the movement of money. And maybe what you are doing is moving money in and around the traditional banking system, but you're not necessarily empowering the people who are moving that money. How do you respond to that and some of the concerns that Tashmi has raised?
Okay, so I think that the way M-Pesa started was to actually allow for mobile money transfer, as you mentioned. Okay, so migrant workers would go work in the big cities. They wanted to transfer money home to their families and their savings, and that's how it started. If you look today at the M-Pesa ecosystem, there's a lot of different financial services. I tend to agree with Tash. I hate it when it gets exploited, and my biggest bugbear with mobile is that prepaid customers who pay in advance pay more for their minutes and their SMSs and their airtime and data than postpaid customers. So for me, that is an issue. I mean, I don't believe that the bottom of the pyramid as such should be exploited. I think the opposite. You should try and use technology to enable those people to simplify their life, give them access to information, enhance the problems that we have with education and health through technology, and be able to deliver knowledge and empower them rather than make it more expensive for them just because of affordability issues. That I have a big issue with.
Let's take it one step further. Raphael, microfinance, in particular microinsurance products that are being made available to the poorest of the poor. Do you get a sense that there's a strong enough regulatory regime on the continent to make sure that the consumer is ultimately protected and they don't become increasingly indebted because they now have access to these particular products?
Unfortunately, I won't say it's strong enough quite yet. I think with all these innovations, the innovators are a bit ahead of like the regulators, and I think the regulators definitely need to move faster in that regard. I've heard of loans being given which are at significantly high interest rates that in a formal banking sector you wouldn't actually see those kind of loans. So they're invariably like, you know, almost like organized loan sharks reaching out to the more vulnerable people in society. So yes, definitely the regulators could move faster.
Tasha, let's move on from some of the negativity and maybe talk about where the opportunities are. Just recently we heard of that groundbreaking deal between the Steinhoff Group buying Pepco as they're moving into retail and servicing that particular market on the continent. Outside of retail, where is the money to be made?
I think, you know, your space. When you're looking at physical goods, the cost, the cost of overcoming all these infrastructural issues in delivering product is so high that you often have to sell those things at a higher cost or higher margin than you would in a developed area. But when you deal in the mobile space and anything that can be delivered digitally, you know, you're able to sort of leapfrog over the ditches in the road, the potholes in the road. And I think in the mobile space, we probably are going to see a lot more innovation than we already have. And it's significant at the moment.
And again, would you tie that up to financial services in particular? Do you think that's going to really take off more? Or is the pie wider than what I'm seeing?
So, you know, financial services don't have to be insulated into just that. There's a way of connecting and bundling. So we were talking about insurance. We've seen a very interesting insurance model in Kenya where they've bundled insurance with the cost of the seed and the fertilizer. Right. So here we have a physical good and financial services coming together and adding real value for people in that value chain. Also what they do is on a USSD menu, so very easily accessible, when they sell you this insurance, you also get information on growing your crops, pesticides that you can use, safe pesticides that you can use. So empowering farmers to become better farmers at the same time that they give them a service. That's the kind of model we want to see.
Joran, what are you most excited about in the next 15 to 20 years in this particular space?
I think education. I think the only way to reach the masses from an education perspective is through mobile. Mobile money that we spoke about, in general mobile financial services. So I agree with Tasha's example around combining content, commerce, and delivering it to the right person digitally, because logistics is a big issue in Africa all over. And I'm very excited about bridging the digital divide and seeing this huge emerging middle class come along. And exploiting technology to do that so we can leapfrog, you know, because I think that the problem that we have is that we don't have enough educated people on the continent with real jobs. You know, we tend to be very blue collar focused at the bottom of the pyramid, And I'd like to see the same things that happened in the Philippines and in India, where technologies actually act as a way to bridge the digital divide and really empower people to move up the value chain.
But the cost of data has to come down for that to happen.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
It's not going to happen otherwise.
So we'll leave it on the cost of data. So the cost of data has to come down if we were to better service the bottom of the pyramid. We've had a really insightful conversation, some tension points, but definitely opportunities that are still waiting to be tapped into. That's where we're going to leave it for tonight. Thank you for making the time to join us, and a very big thank you to my guests for sharing their insights. Don't forget to send us your comments. The details are on your screen right now. Tonight with Bruce is up next, so do stay tuned. For myself and the Invest Africa team, it's goodbye for now.